But it's always a pleasure to welcome to the program our great friend, Frank Gaffney, the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. Frank, it's been an interesting 24 hours, maybe 36 hours after the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin and then the news conference that followed. I wanted to get your take on what happened.
I think what happened, Lars, is that the president of the United States went into a 4-hour conversation, apparently without note takers, with a translator, of course, with one of the most seasoned, skillful, and dangerous men on the planet. And I don't think it came out very well, frankly. And I'm hoping that what will now take place is that the president will be back on his game. I think by and large he's done splendidly on national security issues. This was an exception, and I think he's begun doing some course corrections, and we're going to need to see more of that, I believe.
When you say it didn't come out well, what changed other than the rhetoric and, of course, the president's correction of his comment yesterday, which I'm not necessarily sure he misspoke yesterday, but he says he did, so there it is.
Well, I think the thing that's worrying, and we don't have much to go on here, Lars, let's be honest. We're talking about basically what Vladimir Putin said in the first part of his 10-minute soliloquy in that press conference, essentially enunciated the Soviet as well as Russian agenda for decades. It's all part of their plan for trying to, at the very least, weaken us, if not take us down. And he asserted, without correction by the president, that this is what they agreed to work on, was the Soviet agenda, the Russian Soviet agenda. And I think that, if it were in fact the case that the president agreed to all of that, and that that's now the terms of reference for what the national security councils of the two countries will be beavering away at, that would be wrong. It would be a serious strategic mistake, and I'm fairly confident that that won't be the case because I have such high regard not only for basically the president's instincts on these things, but also for the people that he's brought around him in the National Security Council staff now, who I think will insist on some course corrections which are needed.
Do you think he's got the people around him who actually support his agenda? Because I seem to always be hearing from folks, some of them former members of the government, but some of them even current members of the government who say, well, we don't think the president's going the right direction on this. I mean, I think Mattis is trustworthy. I think Pompeo is trustworthy. And they understand they work for the man who's in charge. He calls the shots. They help him make it happen. But do you think enough of the old guard has been replaced so that the new ones aren't saying, well, he's going one direction, but we'll take the country the other direction? Because I get the sense that's part of what's going on here, is that they're saying, well, it doesn't matter what Trump, some people in the government are saying it doesn't matter what Trump says, we're the real government, and we're going to make it go the direction we think it ought to go.
Well, we've talked a lot about that since he became president, Lars, of course, and I think I would say today the president has around him people who will help him make the sorts of changes he needs to make in what went on yesterday. But that would simply be to bring it back into alignment, his general direction, with what he was saying and laid out as his national security strategy before Helsinki, and what it needs to be going forward. So I put this in a somewhat different category than, for example, H.R. McMaster, the previous national security advisor, constantly undermining the president on his policy initiatives. I think in John Bolton, and I would put him right in the top ranks of those who are loyal to this president, who want to see him succeed, and who know that with his leadership, we can get the course properly set and make a huge difference in the security of this country and a lot of other people besides.
Well, let me ask you about this, about the meddling issue. Frank, it's always confounded me that yes, we're shocked, I tell you, that the Russians were meddling in our election, as though it's something new or it's something that the United States doesn't also do, and something that we kind of expect any country of any size to attempt to do to the other countries that it deals with on planet Earth. So would it surprise me if the French mess around in Algerian elections or in elections in the Middle East? Would it surprise me that the Germans don't try to influence elections in countries that matter to them? I think all of the countries are doing it. And if people say, well, that's a 6-year-old's answer, hey, Mom, everybody does it. No, my answer is that the United States tries to influence elections in foreign countries, maybe as many as a few dozen of them, and has for essentially the entire length of its existence. And there's nothing wrong with it, but we're kind of shocked and offended when it's done to us, and we should do everything we can to stop it from being done to us, but we should expect that it's going to happen. Am I off base?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think the thing that is causing so much of the peak that we're hearing from people on both sides of the aisle is that the Russians seem to have figured out some ways of doing it rather more efficiently than we've done it in the past, and they've done it in the past for that matter. And as you say, countries all over the world do it all the time. This cyber business is something of a game changer. Now, as best we can tell, it didn't make that much of a difference in this election, but I think there's no question they've tried it, and they'll be trying it more, and they'll probably be refining their techniques, and they may be even more impactful. So I think pushing back on it is a good, policy and necessary step. But you're right. I think we ought to be careful about being too hypocritical as we're doing.
Well, I mean, I went back and looked up the Senate hearing from 3 years ago where they determined that the Obama administration spent several $100,000 to try to make sure that Netanyahu in Israel did not get reelected. That's as recent history as 3 years ago. The Senate hearing that investigated that, and they said they sent money over there allegedly to help out the Palestinians, and they ended up building voter databases and hiring people to try to make sure Netanyahu didn't get reelected. I haven't heard a single American politician during all of this say, well, we vowed to never involve ourselves in trying to change the outcome of an election in a foreign country. And I don't think any one of them ever would.
Probably not. But that doesn't mean they won't be hypocritical about it. You're putting your finger on the problem. That is the nature of politicians, let's be honest.
Well, then let's be honest. Be honest with the American public.
Just the money. Lars, it wasn't just the money. I believe, if memory serves, Barack Obama sent in his A-team of political operatives to help take down Bibi Netanyahu, which was, really scandalous as far as
and paid for with the American tax dollars, which you and I know.
Yep.
At least at home, we have rules that literally say that if a president wants to raise money for campaign purposes, he has to step outside the White House because he can't officially use a phone that's sitting in the White House. And so most of them do. They have a little room somewhere else where they, and I remember Gore would do that, Clinton would do that, because they said we can't officially use anything that's connected to the government in campaign fundraising, even if it's just making phone calls. They're that careful on everything else. And then they say, oh, yeah, let's go over and take some taxpayer dollars and divert them for political use to try and change the outcome, not of an adversary like Russia, but of an ally like Israel. In fact, it'd be interesting to ask some people on the Senate Select Committees or the House Select Committees, have we ever spent money to try to change the outcome of a Russian election? Because I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm just saying it gets done. Frank Gaffney is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy.